Welcome to Jeff Teaches the Web. Today, I'm going to create an accordion in 100 lines or less, turning a little known HTML element called details from this to this. Let's get started. So first, let's copy what the HTML will look like. So it starts off with nothing less except a details HTML element. So there's a few parts to the details HTML element. There's one part, which is the summary, which is kind of like the header of the element. And then you have another block, which is the rest of the content, which we've just put into a div called content. So you can see that the logarithm is right there. Next part that we're going to do is add the CSS. So this is Sass. So I'm going to change this to Sass right here and save and close. So what this first part is basically default styling. So we've got a body, we're just putting a background color of FAA, and then putting a font family, otherwise it would look pretty ugly. We've got a little container that's just centered in the middle, and a little bit of styling just to make this a black, and then the inside text a gray. We've got the CSS for the accordion. The first bit is just a tap color, so this is just something for Safari, where on phones, if you tap, there'll be like a gray highlight color. So right here, so see here, this little border, and then we've just added a bit of a padding here just so that it spaces out. In the summary itself, we've got two different elements. We've got one which is the summary itself. So you can see here the example accordion. We just put a cursor pointer so that when you highlight over, it has the right pointer. And we've just put a little bit of a display flex align item. So this means that we have two elements. We have one element which is the accordion itself, the title, and then we've got a second element which is the after. So an after is just this little element right here. So these two elements combined so that you have on the left hand side the example accordion, on the right hand side you have the element that changes between. We've also got one last little bit which is details marker. It's just something WebKit does, so we're just disabling it for details. We've got two different types of accordions. One which is a info accordion, so it's just a little plus minus. Then we've got another one so you can create different versions of the accordion, which is just a little arrow like that. So let's get started. The first thing that we want to do is create a class called accordion. The reason why we're creating a class is so that we can create multiple different elements of this object. And then what we need to do is select these details accordions. So all I'm going to do is do a for each below. So you can see this might look a little complicated if you haven't started using arrow functions, but this basically means document.query selector all details, which is the type of the HTML element, the class of accordion, and then you're doing a for each element that the document has, and then here you're just doing the equivalent of function accordion and then a little opening, and then you just do new accordion. That's the equivalent of it. So if I take this out, if we do a console log of accordion, and then I go into my console, we should constructor element, and then put this inside there, new accordion. There we go. And then you see two accordions. So let's just undo all that. Let's just start with a small arrow function right here. Cool. So next, we're going to do what we had before, which is just we're going to create a constructor. Constructor basically starts at start every time a new accordion class gets initiated. So we're going to create a this.l equals L. Cool. This.l equals an element, so the element that gets passed in. We want to define a summary. So this is the summary element that we're talking about here, and then we're defining a content element that we're defining right here. So that's this div right here. On the summary event, so this right here, we're going to create a click event, which is going to have a this.onClick. So we're going to handle the onClick in a function outside the constructor. Put that away. Just give ourselves a little bit more room. Now we're going to handle the onClick event. So we're going to pass e, which is basically the event. You can see right here. And we're going to make sure first to prevent what the browser wants to do with a details element. So now you can see if I try and click, nothing happens. Now we can do our own magic. This is the open attribute. So if not open, then we want to this.open. So we're going to create a function called this.open. So let me create a function called open. And then else we can create another function called this.shrink. So we have shrinking and open. So shrink, open. We can kind of make this a little easier to read by literally just deleting the curly braces and making sure that all we're going to do is just return out of the function. So this means that once it goes, if this element doesn't equal anything, then just do this function. And then if that doesn't work, then it goes to the next line where we just do return this.shrink. In this.open, we're going to define a fixed height. So it knows what to calculate to. So this.element.style equals offset height. So offset height is basically the inside of an element. We want to make sure that we define, we use the thematic HTML this.open equals true. Little explanation here. These are called template literals. So you have backticks on the outside. So this is the equivalent of, if I change this to, let's go right here, it'd be this.element.offset height plus pixels. But it's much easier to read, of course, like that. So we're just going to keep that like what we had before. So now we're going to create a function called this.expand, which is just going to create the transition. Function body. It's saying there's an issue. I don't believe there's an issue. I can check if everything's working at least to the start by just doing a little console. Console.log equals clicked. There is an issue. Okay. Let me check. Open. Turn this dot open. Cool. Let me just take that tag out. Cool. All right, great. So you can see what it's doing is there's an offset height, so it's defining a height, but we need to expand it. We're going to define a starting height and an ending height. So this is right here. I'm going to go put it in here. So starting, ending. And then we're going to create the animation between these two different heights. So all we do is this.animation, calling the animation, and then equals this.l.animate. So we're storing the animation, and we're just going to define what we want, which is basically we want the heights that we've just defined, so right here. And then we want to define what we want to, like the animation itself. So we've got a duration of, say, 300 milliseconds and a easing of ease out. Let's refactor this because we might use this again when we're opening and closing. So let's just define it here. This dot speed equals 300, and this dot ease, which is going to be a constant, is ease out. So we're going to use that elsewhere. So all I'm going to do is call this dot speed, and this one's going to be this dot ease. Cool. So you can kind of see it's starting to work a little bit. You can see, so we have the opening. So if I click this other one, you can see it's opening. What we want to do is define a set of base defaults that we go to. So I'm just going to call this going to call this function animation reset. So we're going to insert what the open is. So if it's going to be not open or open, so we can use it for both closing, shrinking, and opening. And then all we do is just set some open attributes. And we're just going to clear out the animation, and this is just removing that fixed height. So we only need that fixed height so that a calculation can be made right here. You can see that. So now we've got something called animation reset. And what we want to do is in the expand area after the animation, so this is called this dot animation on finish. So this means when the animation is finished, all we're going to do is go this dot animation reset true. That's all. So that's going to set the open to true. So you can see that. Look at that. If I stay on page, I'll click save, call this tutorial, and open up my JavaScript, and just open that. Look at that. So now we've got the open sort of done. Let's get the other side, the closing. So this is called shrink. So what we have to do is define where we want, where it's going to start. So we're storing the current height of the element, so the total element right here. So if you see this, like the box of the detail summary, and then we're wanting to go to the height of just the summary itself. So now all we do is we do a similar animation. So let's literally just copy this animation right here. Actually, let's make sure we're indenting just so it's easy to read. And then we're just going to animate between the two elements. What we will also want to do is just have a this.animation on finish. So we want to set this to false because when the animation finishes, we want to make sure that the open tag, the open schematic right here, open attribute, sorry, is false. So if I go open, that, just to kind of understand a little bit, let's just also just do a console log of this dot element dot open, so we can see what the different states are. So if I click this, you'll see true, false, true, false. So as you can see, it's a little bit buggy. So let's kind of clean that up a little bit. So what we're going to do is create something called a delay. This is to kind of call it this.delay equals 250. So this is to solve the issue that we're having of the text cutting out. So we want to delay the animation of the shrink by this amount. So all we're going to do is go down to shrink, and we're just going to add a delay of this dot delay. So the reason why I capitalize things like this as a constant is because it allows you to see clearly that these two aren't going to change. So like that. So this is getting pretty close, right? So there's a little bit of delay, but as you can see, there's no fade. So what we're going to do is define a little dynamic transition of right here. We're basically going to use the same, we're going to use a transition of the delay amount, so it just does the transition just enough, and we're going to use the same ease out for the element. So if we go like that, nothing happens because we haven't done anything with opacity. So next up, what we have to do is define on the shrink element, make sure that it's invisible. So this means that the content will be invisible when you close it. So I go like that, to that. But when I open it up again, it's still invisible. So what we have to do is make sure on the expand, we're going to put it right here. So let's go like that. So that's not right, is it? The reason why it's not right is we have to wait for the height to go from start to end. The animation has to finish before we make the content visible. So all we do is just put it right in here. Like this. So when the animation finishes on the expansion, the content will show up. Look at that. Let me just also delete this console log. So let's clear that. That's getting pretty good, isn't it? However, an issue happens where if we have more text, it's going to be the same amount of speed. So you see that? So what we need to do is make sure first, you can see actually, we need to define at the start that the opacity is 0 when you first create the accordion, because you can see it actually flashes. So if I go clear, now you see it works. If I comment that out, you see that? So we're just going to leave that right there. So we're starting it as invisible. Now let's move on to the next problem, which is, you'll see, these take the exact same amount of time, which doesn't really feel very nice. So all we're going to do is create a function that's just going to calculate the speed. And we're going to aptly name it calculate speed. So I'm just going to put it right here, call it calculate speed. So all we're going to do is take in a height. So this is kind of a reference from outside the function. And all we're going to do is return height for now. The intention here for the future is we're going to make it so that if you want an open and close to be different, so actually let's just do it now, right? Why not? So if this dot element is not open, so we're going to return height times 2. Else, when it's closing here, because it will go twice the speed when it closes. So now we've got a way to calculate speed. So we can just no longer define this as a hard-coded thing. Instead, we're going to, for expand, we're just going to define it as the content's total height. So right here, we're just going to define it at the top. This dot speed equals this dot content offset height. So that's the internal height of the content inside here. And then this means that we also need one for shrink. So we need to calculate based on the same this.content offset height. So we're calculating between these two. So what's happening now, as you can see, is these take the standard amount of time to take the same distance. So it means that this will take twice as long as this one because it's got twice as much content. Isn't that cool? So now, there's one extra thing that I foresee if you use something like this, which is, say you want one of the details to be open. You can see here that it's blank. So that means that the opacity of the element is 0. If this dot open, so you can see if this dot open, we're going to do this dot open right here. So set the height to the offset height. Open is true, and this dot expand. But you can see it didn't transition. The reason why is we've put this dynamic transition below it. So say if I move this above it, like this, it will, if I do this right, let's just click save, call this accordion lesson. Click save, cool, and then I refresh. You see it moves because of the transition between opacities. So all I'm going to do is move this down below. So that means that when it loads, instantly it's fine. Now, now that we've done that, you can see now we've got a nice little transition between the two elements. So you can see here, you can see that the transition isn't working just right. So let's figure out why that's happening. The reason why it's happening is, let me try and refresh it actually. Let's stay on page, click save, refresh. So it looks like there's no transition between the heights. So what we need to do is figure out why that's happening. So that one's working. Okay, so the open isn't animating. Interesting, interesting. Okay, on click, this dot open, return this dot shrink. Let me get back to you once I debug this. So the issue was that it's already open, so we only need to do a this dot expand and a this dot shrink. So if the element exists open, so we want to expand the whole element. So let's just see that. So if I click that, it's open, and then closed. Look at that. Great. Awesome. Let me know if you have any questions down below, and I'm more than happy to answer them. And as you can see, it's just under 100 lines.